Hello folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And this is part number 4 of the big cleanup of the David Brown. We shot blasted the fenders to the bare metal, and also shot blasted the dashboard to the bare metal, and we applied already now a primer onto the dashboard and to one of the fenders. Now this fender isn't finished yet. I'm still putting some polyester putty up, and you can see all the white spots here to get it a little bit more smooth. It's not going to be showroom smooth, but it will be smooth enough. So this fender will be sprayed pretty soon. So I have applied a coat of primer onto the fender, and now that's cured, and I let it sit here for about 24 hours, and the temperature is around 30 degrees centigrade. And I think this turned out to be quite alright. I also have painted the dashboard, which is over here. And now that's kind of ready to be painted in white as well. Even the inside has been painted, as you can see. So here we go. So now we are ready to start painting it in David Brown white. The first thing for me to do now is to roughen this up a bit with abrasive paper, and I'm going to do it with a grit 800 to take off all the unevenness that might still be in there, or the unwanted creatures that may have fallen into it. But I don't see nothing, so that should be quite alright. And to paint the fender and the dashboard, I'm going to be using tractor paint, which is a very specific paint for tractors. It dries fairly quickly, and it's not that expensive either, and I'm having the right color, which is David Brown white, and this paint comes in multiple colors, all matched up to the different tractor brands. So I'm going to start to mix my paint now, and I made sure that my paint is already on room temperature. The spray booth itself is running at around 20-25 degrees centigrade right now, because I don't want it to dry too fast. So I'm going to take a cup which has a marking on it on what the volume is, and I'm going to put my paint inside. Before I do so, I will shake it very well. So I probably will fill it up to about, see how far I get, 450 milliliters. Pour that in and see how far we get. 450 milliliters, which is, that's good. That's about what I wanted to have. So now I'm going to dilute it with about 45 milliliters of that, and then we're going to stir it and see what it tells us, how thick it becomes. You want to have the paint at the right viscosity. You don't want to have it too thick or too thin. It's got to be about right. Now you can check this with a special funnel with a small opening, and you can check how long it takes for the paint to fall through. But if you paint every so often, then you will get to know very quickly how thick the paint should be or should not be. So I'm going to put some hardener into it, resistant to scratches and so on. And again, I'm going to mix it as much as I can. Now if you're going to paint with this kind of paint, make sure that you have a good ventilation and that you do have a really good mask with the proper filters. That is very important. You don't want to risk your life on this or your lungs. They have to last a long time, right? And actually fill it up. And as you can see, I'm always using a Zift, just to make sure that I get no particles inside my spray gun that can clog up my nozzle. So let's go and paint it. So now I'm going to let it dry for about 12 hours, and the temperature inside now is around 30 degrees. Let's see, it's still a bit sticky, but it starts to dry pretty quick, so that's good. And the dashboard looks alright. It's the same thing, it's drying pretty fast. And for those of you that have been watching my previous episodes on building your own paint booth, I can assure you that this paint booth is working pretty well. I've used it for the Lotus Elise, I use it for the Mini, I use it for the TVR, I have used it for the MGB GT, and I use it as well on the David Brown. So, you know, it works pretty well, and of course you might get a small dust particle here and there, but who cares, you can polish that out. So now I'm going to continue on the other fender, sand it down, get it ready for painting in the primer, and then we'll put the final coat up as well as soon as I can get the other fender out of the paint booth. And as soon as the weather clears up, I will actually take care of the tractor body itself and the engine to get it steam cleaned and sprayed. And it's been raining like hell lately, so that will have to wait. So instead, I'm going to work on the dashboard. We put the dashboard back together, at least with all the dials and all the knobs and so on. And then we will work on the lifting mechanism. So let's get on with the dashboard. This is the dashboard that we repainted and corrected where we had to correct it. And now we can actually install all the different parts. Meanwhile, I received all the new parts or switches and dials that I needed to get. We are about ready to install it. I had to adjust a couple of holes here for the lights, because the lights that I got were a little bit bigger than the ones that I actually ordered, but that happens sometimes. And some of you are asking me, where do I buy the parts? Why don't I put a link up? Well, I don't get sponsored by anybody. I just do my own thing, and I'm not really into making commercials at all. So that's why I'm kind of reluctant to actually provide links and show brands and so on. But I can understand that you have a certain interest in it. So one of the shops where I go to for my tractor parts is what we call Histoparts. And Histoparts is a store in the Netherlands that has all kind of parts for old tractors and actually for some old cars as well. They are very quick in delivery and they have very good prices. But again, guys, I'm not making a commercial for them. For those of you that are interested in it, you can see the link that's on there. I don't know where they deliver, if they deliver in the US or in Australia or wherever you're watching from. But in Europe, they certainly deliver very quickly. The new parts that I got was a pull switch, and unfortunately they didn't have it with a black handle. I also have the blinker switch. This is the new switch because the old blinker switch I broke. We are recovering our light switch, so the positioning for the lights, and I have 3 new large control lights. And I have here as well a fuse box. This is this black box that you see right here. And that's something I'm going to install because I don't like these floating fuses. And inside, you actually have all the fuses that you're going to need. You can get this fuse box also with spades, but this one is actually just with connectors to connect the cable to. But let me show you the spade version. As you can see, it's exactly the same, but now you have spades instead of screws to tighten down the wires. So they're exactly the same. There are 8 fuses inside. You can get them in different sizes, and I think this is really nice to use. So now we're going to reinstall all these parts onto the dashboard. And we're also going to install new warning lights, and they are a little bit bigger than the original ones, but I have 3 of them. So the red one is actually for your alternator, is the battery is charging or not. The green one is for the oil pressure, and then the orange one or the yellow one is actually for your hydraulic fluid. I'm going to retain my original contact key because that was still intact, so I don't need to change that. The RPM and hour counter was intact and nothing was wrong with it, and as you can see we cleaned it up as much as we could, and that's going to go back in. I'm going to replace the temperature gauge. The old one is a little bit damaged on the outside, the glass is scratched and so on. So I'm going to put a new one in, and the same thing for the fuel level meter or the gasoline meter. That will be a new one. And then finally I have the push button for the horn. That is going to be a new one as well because the old one was broken when I took it out. The first one on the left, just above the 2 gauges, is the warning light for the hydraulics. I'm going to follow that up with a green warning light, which is actually the one for my oil pressure. And fitting these lights is pretty easy. You have a large nut in the back, and here is that nut I was referring to with the lines on. Hopefully you can see it. And the lights are coming without the bulb, so you will have to fit a bulb into these warning lights. So that all you need to do is unscrew that top cover, and then inside, as you can see, you can insert the bulb, which I will do now. And then all you need to do now is just close it up, and we should be all set. So just fit it through the hole and then tied it up from the back, and I'm just trying to reach it now. And you will see on the nut there is a side that has some marks on them and a side that has no marks on it. That's just to make sure that it stays nicely in place. So I'm now just locking that into place. So now let's do the warning light for the charge of the battery. It's the same way. Put the big nut in the back. So next up is the horn switch, and again that's pretty easy. Just slide it in and use again a plastic nut in the back to tighten that down. There we go, and that should be it. That should be the horn. Now this is an extra warning light that I'm going to put in, which we're going to use for warning that the preheating is on. And then we're also going to install the pull switch, which is actually going to activate the fog light in the rear. So now let's move that in, tighten it down. Typically what you don't want to do is to turn the nut where the paint, on the side of the paint. It's probably better to turn it in the back. For this switch I had a bit the same issue. I couldn't get a black one, so I have an kind of a white one, but it's okay. So here's that switch, and that works just fine. So now we're going to install the blinker switch, and that's a new one. And that's this pretty big guy here. So I had to take off the top part first, and I had to wiggle it off. And then you take off the big nut, which is over here. And as you can see, this blinker light also has a bulb in it, so that will flash as well once we turn the blinkers on. So I'm going to take the big nut off, the washer, because I'm going to use the washer on the top. There we go. Lock that down. And then, let's see, we should be able to put the switch up, and there's a key on that, so you want to make sure you have the key in the right way, otherwise you're going to break it. So we have the left blinker, the middle, and the right. Now if you want to make sure that the switch is right vertical, you just need to adjust it and then tighten down the nut. So I'm turning it a little bit. I think this is better. Let us install now one of the gauges. So we're going to install that, and you see there is a rubber. Make sure you have the rubber on it. And then you have the two threaded bolts here, which you will need to use together with this clamp in the back that will go through it, and then use these small nuts to tighten that up. I place it in the right direction, of course, and here we go. So that's the gauge, and I will tighten that up in the back in a few minutes. And we're also going to install now the temperature gauge, and that's next to the fuel gauge. And again, it has the rubber and the same kind of support in the back. I just want to align them right. There we go. Make sure it's straight. Now before I'm going to flip it over, I'm going to tape up these gauges and these dials so they can't fall out. Because that's the last thing you want, right? You don't want to have your gauges falling out once you're flipping this over. So, alright, so that should be more than good enough. So let's flip it over and try to connect things in the back. And then you can actually see it, what we are connecting. I already connected one of the gauges with a bracket, and here is the bracket that needs to go on this gauge right here. So just slide it over there and put the bolts up, or the nuts. Here we go, this is the nut, and then just screw it on there. Now again, like anything else, don't over tighten this. There's no need to put a lot of force on it. Just use your fingers and make it tight with your fingers. Now this guy is pretty much the same, except that the brackets are separate, as you can see. We don't have one which is going across the dial, and these are the original brackets, obviously. And here are our old screws, and hopefully they go on easily. So let us flip over the dashboard to the other side again and verify if the switches are still in the right place and the gauges are still in the right place. And I think they actually are. So now I can remove that tape, no longer needed. And I think this is looking pretty nice. Where it brings us, the light switch, here we go. Okay, so I'm having a washer and I'm having the nut. So here's the knob, and we can put that on there and see if that works. And the last thing that needs to go on is the contact switch, and again here we're going to use a big washer on the outside. So let's move that guy in and put the big washer up. Remember, this is also the original one. So let's see if I can turn it with this socket, and I'm going to try to hold the switch in the back at the same time. Alright, and we can always tighten it afterwards once we've done all the cabling. Oh, that's better. Perfect. To mount the fuse box, I made two brackets, and this is the second bracket. which I will fix onto the bracket inside the dashboard where the old regulator was. So you hear that sound? That is actually the rain outside, and it rains like hell. So at least we got the dashboard ready, and the dashboard I'm going to be putting it aside now until we have the new wiring loom in. But I can't put the new wiring loom in before the engine and the chassis is being resprayed off the tractor, and that I cannot do right now because of the rain. So let me put this aside, and then we continue on something else because we got plenty of other work to do. But don't worry, we are not out of work yet on this tractor because of the rain. The next thing is to work on the lift mechanism. Now the attachments that I'm going to hook up to the tractor are using what we call a type 1 eyelet, or whatever you call these things. And these are these eyelets, that's where these axles are going through. So my attachment has a 19mm pin. So that has to fit properly into these eyelets on the lifting mechanism or the lifting arms of the tractor. Now currently the lifting arms that I have are having really big eyelets, class 2 or type 2, which are way too wide. And when I say mil, I mean millimeters, not to be confused with thousandths of an inch. For the lifting arms, so I have here two eyelets, two different types. One is a bit under an angle, as you can see, and to be honest, I don't know what you call those really in English. Both are type 1, 19mm attachments, and I will have to weld those onto my lifting arms of my tractor so that the pin of my attachment fits snug into that, see? As I just showed you before, the eyelets on my tractor are way too big for my attachment, which is a type 1, and these are type 2s, and you can see how much play that is, and on top of that, these are worn out. I already kind of welded and repaired them once before, and you might remember that video. But that's not the only problem I'm having. Let me show you some other issues. The other issue on the lifting mechanism is too much play. See, if I move this up, see how much play we have? Now, I can deal with a little bit of play, but this is way too much, so we'll have to fix this. And we also have the other problem, see that? That play right here, how much that is? So that's a lot of play, so we need to fix that as well. A little bit of play here will be magnified many times at the end of the head trimmer's blade. So I want to have this properly fixed. And there are many areas where we have that play. See? So I need to disassemble this whole unit. I'm going to start by undoing these bolts here on the lifting arms. I can then pull out the pin, and then on the top I have another bolt, and then this whole thing can come off, and then we will be able to cut off this eyelet and weld a new one on, and then rework all these pins. So that's going to be a little bit of work, but it's got to be done. Oops, wrong direction. Oh, that went easy. I'm sure not everything will be that easy on this tractor. It's been on there for a hell of a time, so maybe I can even remove this whole chain. So let's see if we can get this guy off here. There's a pin in there. It's pretty rusted. Okay. Well, that didn't go too bad. But look at that pin, huh? Look at the state it's in. So next is to disconnect the lifting part itself, which is going up to the hydraulic arm. And I already have rebuilt this one, as you can see. This is a rebuilt one. I did that last time. So I don't need to redo this one. So now I can actually remove the backside. That should be it. Here we go. So let's see. Oh, it's going to be tough to get off. Unlock this bolt here first now. This bolt is already damaged, so I'm going to take the big weapons and try it. Yeah, all right. Oh, I got lucky on this one. If this comes out. Wow. Now that's going to be something to get out. I've tried to remove these big bolts on these lifting arms, but I couldn't get them out. No way to get them out. So if you guys can tell me on how you done that, then I would really appreciate it. At the end, I left them in and decided to do it in a different way. I actually made some shims to compensate for the play and the wear and tear that I had in these holes. And let me show you what I've done there. So I used a piece of a tube that I cut off, which is having more or less the same radius as the wear and tear area, and then I created this kind of a shim like this little thing here. Now this is one that I tried first, but that didn't fit properly, and you can see how that is bent. I had to bend it a little bit more to get it to the right radius, so that's how I did it. Well, you could call it fiddling, but it will do the job for now, until the moment in time I find a way to get these big bolts out. So the next thing we're going to do is to remove these eyelets here. Now this is one that I have removed on the other one already, so we just grinded it off, and then we are replacing it with a new one, and this is a Cat 1 type, so we need to weld it on there afterwards. So it's a bit smaller, so the first thing we need to do now is just grind it off and then weld it on. There we go. And now we'll have to weld this part onto there. So if you're going to cut it, you need to cut it exactly in the spot where it was welded before. So now we're going to clean it up before we weld it, and for that we're using a sanding disc. And then we clean the part that we're going to weld on. So let me hold that and just do that. So now we are ready to weld it on. And you can actually see that this is kind of slanted. And that's good because we can actually fill that up. You want to make sure that it's right in the middle of this bar. So both horizontally and vertically. So that's why you need to use some spacers. And I'm using some metal plates here to space it upwards, because as you can see there is a dent here and it comes down and then there's a dent back up. So this is not a real flat piece of iron. So you got to make sure that you place it under the proper angle to weld this eyelet onto this bar. So the last part of the bar here has to be flat and aligned with this piece here. Now I know these things are quite flexible, but still you want to do that right. So I'm going to place it right in the middle. So I think this is about right. So now we can start welding it up. And as you can see, we lined up this new eyelet properly in the middle of this bar. So I'm going to set the welder to its maximum thickness of steel, which is in my case 5 millimeters, which is half a centimeter, which is just on the edge for welding this. You might want to do this with a stick welder if you have one, but this should work. So now we can actually weld this up. All right. It has to be a very strong weld because you're lifting up your attachments with this joint right here. Now these bars are connecting to the lifting arms, and there are holes in there to attach it, and these holes are worn out, so I drilled it out and I put a bush inside and welded in the bush. And now with the new pins that I made, I can actually tie down tightly the lifting arms, which are going to be sitting right here, and now I have minimum play on this. So that's why I made these pins. Now you can do this in whatever way you want to do it. There you go. So I still need to make a couple of others, and let me show you how one of the old ones looked like. So this is one of the other pins where the arm actually attaches to the rear axle, and you can see how that is worn and bent. Not in a pretty good shape, so we're going to make some new ones for that. And for that, I'm just going to use an ordinary piece of steel that I have. Not this one, because this one is really bent. And we're going to put it on the lathe, and we'll make us a new pin. So here is my old rusty metal bar we're going to use to create those two new pins. And I'm going to use a lathe for that. Now this is a very cheap lathe, and it's also a pretty old one. Not very precise, but more than good enough for this kind of work. Now if you don't have a lathe, then you can of course buy the pins because they are standard size. Alright, so let's put the bar in. Since the bar is fairly long, I'm going to hold it with a central pin. Here are our two pieces that we've cut off. So I'm going to use a big washer instead and weld that on there. That should do the job. Very thick one. And I'm just going to weld that on there, and that should be no problem whatsoever. That should just work fine. It's more than thick enough. So that's that one. It's still a bit hot, and we already have our second one. So the only thing I need to do now is actually to clean that up a bit, and I'm just going to grind it off slightly. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is to drill the hole so we can put the pen through it, and then we are done. Now we have all the pins ready. I have two bigger ones and two smaller ones, and I drilled the holes, so now we can put these clips through them to hold them in place. There we go, and this is how it should look like at the end. And the next thing we're going to do is to clean the tractor with a high pressure cleaner, but with hot water around 80 to 90 degrees centigrade with some soap to get all the grease off, so we can actually then start painting the engine when it's all dried up. I'm quite happy that I'm finished washing the tractor because it was a pretty dirty job. Now, I did wash the tractor with hot water at around 80 to 90 degrees centigrade with soap in it. And the reason for that is to get all the grease and the dirt off the tractor that's been on it for over 30-40 years. And after I was finished washing it, I noticed that some areas were pretty uneven, other areas were very smooth to paint. So if you go in to paint the tractor, you can't paint on very smooth surfaces, so you need to make it a little bit rough, so you would have to sand it down. And instead of sanding it down with sanding paper, I quickly shot blasted the tractor. Not a lot, because I didn't want it to go to all the bare metal everywhere. I just wanted to take most of the paint that was there off where it was supposed to be taken off, and also to make it a little bit more rough, so you can actually see the very gray parts. That's bare metal now. The other parts are still having a little bit of paint on it, but the paint has been made rough, so whenever I'm going to paint the tractor, it's going to stick pretty well. So what I'm going to do next is actually to take the wheels off the tractor and place it on a stand. The tractor is around 4,500 pounds or 2,000 kilograms. Now that's a lot of weight, so you can't use a stand like this, which is an El Cheapo version. This is really something for a very light car. I would never use it on a tractor like this. So I had to go and buy some. Unfortunately, as you can tell, they are brand new. But, you know, they always have a purpose. And these are 6 down stands per stand, and you can easily adjust them by lifting it up. They can go up pretty high. I think at around 68 centimeters, but it might not be high enough to support actually the tractor, but we'll see how it goes. I'm going to jack up the rear part of the tractor on these supports here, and I'm using a 3.5 ton jack for that. And a strong piece of wood, and I'm going to try to have the jack right in the middle. Now I did block the front wheels, so the tractor can't move back or forward. I just need to make sure everything is nicely in balance. And think this is about it. Let's see. Yep. All right, so let's see if we can jack it up. It's squeaking. Because now both wheels are off. Alright, so let me move this guy on the side. So I'm using an additional rubber block to lift the stand because otherwise if I have to lift them all the way up then they become less stable. So now I'm just going to lock it. There we go. So the problem now is that you can't take off the second wheel because now the tractor is out of balance. So I need to lower the jack and then start lifting it on the other side. So let me lower that carefully. See how that goes. I want to be sure that I have no issue. And that seems to be okay. You always have to be careful when you do this kind of work because this is really heavy stuff. So now the wheel is free. I'm having the tractor on the stand now and I noticed that there's still a lot of debris and dirt. So the tractor is about ready to be painted. I have it cleaned up, I have it degreased, so normally it should be good. But then again, a tractor is always a very greasy piece, so hopefully I don't have too many issues with this. So I'm going to prepare the paint and we're going to start painting. I taped off different areas that I don't want to spray and then we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to start to paint from the bottom and then work my way up. Still not paint. Oops. I think that's better. 2 hours and 2.5 liters of paint later, the tractor is finally painted. And it turned out to be quite alright. The paint is really drying up very quickly, although it's not that warm outside, it's around 16 degrees centigrade. But you can see that you actually can paint in a barn. You don't need to have a spray boot. Okay, you have some dust in it here and there, not a lot, but then again, the casting of the tractor isn't all that clean either. It took a little bit longer than what I expected because there was still so much debris and dust and dirt and grease all mixed together around the wheels. But at the end, I was able to get it all off. I think the 990s are typically red engine blocks, but I'm not sure. But anyway, I think the brown one looks quite alright, so I'm going to keep it like this. I don't really worry too much about correctness of the right color, you know, because this is still a working tractor, or it will be a working tractor. Now I have some masking paper here and there, of course, on all the sensors, and some people will only pull this off when the paint is 100% dry. In fact, that is often too late because I rather pull it off when the paint is like just dry, but not fully dry. Because I have had cases whereby it was very hard afterwards when the paint dried up to take off the masking tape. So I'd rather do it now while I can. So folks, we have come to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and to be honest, I'm quite happy that this job is done, because it is a dirty job to get all the grease off, all the dirt, and painting it is also a pretty dirty job in a barn like this. If you do it in a paint booth, it's quite different. In a barn, well, you got spray all over. But I did wet the floor before, so that always helps a bit. In the next video, we're going to install the fenders, the bonnet, of course the dashboard, and then we're going to install the wiring loom. And by then the tractor should be ready for the new attachment. Thank you for viewing, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.